With it now being a week since the 2025 NFL draft, I think it's appropriate to analyze the biggest takeaways from the NFL draft and really talk about how each team performed in terms of their picks and who really won the draft. Whether it's in the AFC South, the Titans picking Cam Ward, then the Jacksonville Jaguars having the surprise early at the top of the draft, trading with Cleveland for the second overall pick to draft Travis Hunter, who will be a unicorn for that franchise, playing offensively and defensively at the cornerback and wide receiver position. And then really throughout it all, obviously Shedeur Sanders slipping into the 5th round. And if you want to see more of my take on his draft slide, check out my most recent video talking about the whole Shedeur Sanders situation and how I think he has a potential opportunity in Cleveland. But for the rest of the draft, teams like the Houston Texans drafting 2 wide receivers to really ensure that they have depth in that room, having Nico Collins, who's a top 5 to 10 wide receiver in the league, but now with Tank Dell being injured, Stephon Diggs gone, drafting Jaden Higgins and Jalen Noel, 2 college teammates from Iowa State, I think that really helps that room as well too, and will provide more emphasis in analyzing that. A team like the Dallas Cowboys, who yes still have a big need in their wide receiver 2 position, but they added really some steals. Tyler Booker, I know that's a polarizing pick in the offensive line, but he'll help certainly, especially with the retirement of a Zach Martin playing at right guard. Then drafting Donovan Ezraku, who in my opinion was one of the best edges in this draft, falling to 44 in the 2nd round, a really good pick for Dallas. And then a player like Shavon Ravel out of East Carolina, yes he tore his ACL, but really before that injury, he was viewed potentially as a top 3 to 5 corner in this whole 2025 draft. So this team is really emphasizing that point. But then a Cleveland Browns, yes they traded with the Jacksonville Jaguars, but they drafted a Mason Graham who will help stop the run and was one of the best defensive players in college football the past 2 years. Also drafting someone like a Carson Schwarzenegger at the linebacker position. I think that's a very underrated move. And then also double dipping at the running back position, drafting a Quinshon Judkins, one of the best running backs in the country, was a huge part of Ohio State winning the national championship, and also drafting Dylan Sampson, one of the best running backs from Tennessee in the SEC. So there's just a lot of good moves to talk about. A really good running back draft. It was a deep running back class. Running back obviously first off the board, Ashton Jeanty being drafted 6th overall to the Las Vegas Raiders. Then you saw later in the 1st round with Amarian Hampton going to the Los Angeles Chargers. In the 2nd round, like I mentioned, Judkins, but also his teammate Travion Henderson going to the Patriots. It's just a really good draft, guys. And I know a lot of people talked about the wide receiver standpoint not being as talented as other years, but I really don't buy into that too much because I think people were overthinking the wide receiver, specifically a player like Tedero McMillan, who I'm mad as a Dallas Cowboys fan the Carolina Panthers picked, and I think he'll be a huge asset and weapon to them. But even players like a Luther Burden dropping to the 2nd round, that's going to be a really good weapon for Chicago. I'll provide later what I think about the Bears drafting them because in my opinion, I don't think they necessarily needed another wide receiver, but that's just my opinion. And then Emeka Egbuka going to the Buccaneers, I think that's really intriguing there. I think he's a really good prospect and obviously add some more depth to that room in terms of having a Mike Evans, a Chris Godwin returning from injury, a McMillan as well. There's just a lot of intriguing storylines to talk about. Kansas City Chiefs drafting offensive lineman, the Eagles picking Jahad Campbell at number 32, and even the Baltimore Ravens drafting Malachi Starks and drafting Mike Green in the 2nd round, who of course we know some off the field issues, which y'all can Google for yourselves on that. I think it's just a really intriguing draft, and I really liked the whole process leading up to it, emphasizing and watching film on these prospects and learning more about their games and their tape and watching them last year in college football, but also just seeing the teams that they go to and really how things will unfold. Because ultimately, yes, the draft happens, they have their different grades. Even this video, I'm going to grade these teams, but ultimately it's for the players to perform on that team and really put themselves in great situations to win at the next level. And that's how we truly be able to grade a draft and know how significant and how well they did after the impact is seen on the field. So with that being said though, guys, before we dive deeper into the biggest takeaways from this year's 2025 NFL draft, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe and turn on post notifications. You know we post about here videos about the NBA, NFL, Marvel, DC, pop culture. Follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Swaggy Russ, and also on TikTok at Swaggy Russ02 for cooking videos, shorts, reels, all things of that nature. And with that being said, let's talk about the biggest takeaways from the 2025 NFL draft, starting with the first division in the AFC South. So starting off in the AFC South, I want to talk about the Tennessee Titans. Obviously, they drafted Miami quarterback Cam Ward, who had a phenomenal season this past year for the Miami Hurricanes, throwing for over 4,300 yards, 39 touchdowns, and only 7 interceptions, having a quarterback rating of over 172, and finished 3rd overall in the Heisman voting. I think that was probably the most predictable pick. It was pretty chalk, really the first 3 picks, but particularly with Tennessee drafting Cam Ward, I mean, we could have came to that conclusion in late February, early March, but I think that he's going to provide something that obviously the Titans haven't had with a Will Levis or a Mason Rudolph before he left to go to the Steelers. Just someone that you can have trust in and a player that can make plays off schedule. Obviously, Cam Ward, he's not necessarily a player like a Lamar Jackson in terms of athleticism, but he is a quarterback that can buy you a lot of time. We saw him extend plays at a high level last year at Miami, and he's a proven quarterback as well too. As we've seen these number 1 overall picks and really in the past couple of drafts as well too, with a player like a Jaden Daniels or even a CJ Stroud, these players have played a lot of college football. And with Cam Ward, he played of course last year in Miami, but 2 years at Washington State, 2 years at Incarnate Word, 5 years of total college football being played. That bodes well in comparison to a player like a Bo Nix who played a lot of college football and being one of the best quarterbacks from a rookie standpoint last year. Obviously obviously Jaden Daniels played a lot of football as well, playing at Arizona State, then at LSU, and he has had the best rookie year in NFL history. And even the year before that with CJ Stroud, played a couple of seasons with Ohio State and some high-level Big Ten football. So I think from that standpoint, Cam Ward is going to be able to fit right in with Brian Callahan's offense, being the former offensive coordinator for Joe Burrow in Cincinnati. And we saw some of his frustration and things like that with Will Levis for the type of mistakes he made last year. So we know he has a fire in him. And same with Cam Ward, he has a fire and he's a dog as well too in terms of his mentality and wanting to get the best out of his teammates. And his head coach at Miami, Mario Cristobal, attests a lot to his leadership and his mentality and his work ethic, which will be nothing but great for his success in terms of being able to be the leader of that franchise going forward and for the future. And in a division with the likes of a CJ Stroud, who had, of course, a great season in his rookie year, but kind of a sophomore slump in ways. But if you really watch the film and diagnose what went wrong with the Texans last year, blame that some on the offensive line and things of that nature in the scheme. I think that CJ Stroud still owns the best quarterback in that division, but time will tell how Cam Ward translates and how good he performs at the next level, especially in his rookie year and so on. And you have a player like a Trevor Lawrence who already has been extended to a second contract but still hasn't lived up to the hype. So we'll see how he is utilized under new head coach Liam Cohen in Jacksonville, and with a weapon like Travis Hunter and of course Brian Thomas Jr. and then with the Colts. That's the most polarizing team in that division in my opinion, because with Anthony Richardson, he's been very up and down. He has great athleticism, but as a passer, he's not the most efficient. And they brought in Daniel Jones to compete there. And also they drafted Riley Leonard, I know, in a later round. They're showing that they have a specific type of quarterback that they want in Shane Steichen's system, being an athletic dual threat quarterback, but also that can run the offense well. So that's intriguing there. If I still had to predict the winner for the AFC South this year in the 2025 season, I still think it's going to be the Texans, because what they were able to do defensively, adding a player like a CJ Gardner-Johnson, they extended Danielle Hunter, they have Will Anderson Jr., Derek Stingley just got extended, they just extended Jalen Petrie, and they had a pretty good draft in themselves. And like I said, adding a Jaden Higgins and Jalen Noel, some offensive line help and a tackle, drafting Ariante Essery, even an underrated pick in my opinion, drafting cornerback Jalen Smith, kind of also a nickel corner, but just continuing to beef up that defense. I think that bodes well for the Texans and their overall depth, and I think that they're still going to be atop of the division with a new offensive coordinator as well, and Nick Caley that came from the Los Angeles Rams, Sean McVay tree. Things kind of went wrong with Bobby Slowick, so they had to let him go. But we'll see what the Texans do. But the Titans, I think that they can make some noise. I think, in my opinion, the goal for them should be to win anywhere from 5 to 8 games. That'll be a reasonable improvement because they went 3-14. For the Jaguars, really, I'm just intrigued to see how Travis Hunter translates and what he does. And I think that they had an underrated draft as well, with them drafting Travis Hunter second overall, of course. Also like them drafting in the 4th round running back Michelle Tootin from Virginia Tech, who I think will help open things up with that offense with Tank Bigsby, and that makes things very interesting on the status of Travis Etienne, how they'll split the carries in that running back room. But it's going to be intriguing to see how they work things out there in Jacksonville. And with the Colts, like I said, their quarterback situation is going to be intriguing to see who ends up starting. But at tight end position, I don't know if y'all saw my top 10 NFL draft prospects video. I'm really high on Tyler Warren. I think that he translates well, not only as a pass catcher, but also as a blocker. So I think this division will be improved. I think that the Titans, they drafted their franchise quarterback for sure, and they could improve in ways too. And I also like that they added Xavier Restrepo too as an undrafted free agent coming from Miami, same school as Cam Ward, kind of appeasing to Cam Ward. But also I like a pick drafting Alec Ayamanor out of Stanford. Everyone talks about that huge game that he had in college against Travis Hunter. I think that that's another weapon potentially for Cam Ward in that offense, alongside of Calvin Ridley and even a player like Tyler Lockett that they added, and also in the running game that they have with Tony Pollard. So if I had to grade each draft for these 4 AFC South teams for the Tennessee Titans, I would probably give it a B+. I really like it, and like I said, they made some solid moves, but I still don't expect this team to be a playoff contender yet. But you never know. No one expected that from the Commanders last year, and look what they did, made the NFC Championship game. And with the Texans, I would probably give them an A-. I like how they made sure that they'll have some wide receiver depth in case of injury, and of course waiting on the impending status of Tank Dell. And I still think that they will win the AFC South, so I think the Texans will have an A-. The Indianapolis Colts with a B+ as well, because I failed to mention earlier, they of course have Jonathan Taylor at the running back position, but they also added a DJ Giddens in the 5th round, who I think really slipped, and I personally thought he would be drafted around in the 3rd round. I think that he provides a great running back 2 with Jonathan Taylor alongside there, and obviously with Tyler Warren being drafted, even Riley Leonard to kind of beef up that quarterback room, potentially as quarterback 3. I like what they did. And then with the Jacksonville Jaguars, yes, they traded a 1st round pick in 2026 to acquire Travis Hunter and some other draft capital in this year's draft, but I'll give them an A- as well because of how aggressive they are and how they address different needs throughout their 9 different draft picks. Moving on to the AFC North, not gonna lie to you guys, I really like what the Cleveland Browns did. I'm gonna go on and share with y'all my overall grade with them right now. It's a B+, and yes, it's not an A yet. Like I talked about in the intro, acquiring a 1st round pick for next next year's draft in addition to the first round pick that you'll have next year of your own, not even knowing the type of record that you'll have in the 2025 season because still being a question mark at the quarterback position. I think that's a really good thing for the Cleveland Browns. Drafting a defensive tackle in Mason Graham really helps that defensive line overall, not only stopping the run, but Mason Graham has shown flashes of even being able to get to the passer at times as well too. So I think that he'll complement a player like Myles Garrett, who they were able to extend despite him requesting a trade earlier before that. It's huge for them to retain him, but you still have to get that quarterback room right. And it seems like they're having an experimental type of thing with the quarterback room, drafting Dylan Gabriel in the third round, then drafting Shedeur Sanders. I think it's open competition with that spot. Joe Flacco, yes, he had success there 2 years ago in that starting role, but he's very up and down, and we saw that with the Colts last year because while he played a couple of games good, he still played bad, and Anthony Richardson had to come back in. So that's a question mark there. We don't believe in Kenny Pickett as a starter, no offense to him, but he's a backup quarterback, and we saw that in Pittsburgh. I think it's really intriguing to see which rookie could potentially win this spot and maybe take it from a Joe Flacco, whether it's Dylan Gabriel or Shedeur Sanders. A lot of people will want Shedeur Sanders to show that he should have been drafted way earlier and win that job, but only time will tell because in this league, things are earned, not given. But talking about the rest of positions acquired for the Browns, I talked about it in the intro. Really drafting a player like Quinshon Judkins, I think that helps because he's a bell cow type of running back, very physical as a runner, and I like the type of rapport that he had with Travion Henderson, and you can make the case that he'll have a rapport like that with Dylan Sampson, who is also a physical type of running back that'll get between the tackles as well too. So I like that for them. But then I also talked about linebacker Carson Schlesinger being the first pick of the second round. I think that he's going to help in coverage and just really being a downhill type of linebacker where you can move him around and get a good pass rush from him as well too. So I really like that pick. Really a smart intellectual type of player as well too. So that helps with your defense overall. So I think definitely a B plus for the Browns. I think that I still wouldn't expect them to make the playoffs unless Shedeur Sanders or whoever starts at the quarterback position just goes crazy and propels this team to having that type of run they had in 2023. But I expect this to for sure be an improved team with still one of the best defenses in the league, having players like a Denzel Ward and company, and still having Kevin Stefanski as a really good offensive mind. But that quarterback position is going to be a real question mark. But I think that they had a B plus overall of a draft. Talking about the Baltimore Ravens now, I love what they did drafting safety Malachi Starks. I think that he'll complement well with a Kyle Hamilton, who's one of the best defenders in this league, period, an all-pro. I think that that's a steal, drafting him at 27. He's an instant impact type of player, and I think that's what you look for sure in the first round. But I think with Baltimore drafting him, that helps their defense even more because we saw them struggle at the first half of the season, get better in the second half, and you know the playoffs went how they went, losing to Buffalo in the divisional round. But I think that Malachi Starks is a really good pick for them. Drafting Mike Green, edge from Marshall, led the country in sacks last year. Like I said, he has a couple of off-field questions that you can Google, like I said in the intro, but in terms of a pass rushing standpoint, he's going to be able to get to the quarterback. Now it's going to be interesting to see how he can stop the run because that's going to be a really developmental type of thing for his game, because in college they showed that at times he's a one-trick pony. He can rush a passer, but when teams are running at him, he's not necessarily the best. So it'll be key to see how the Baltimore Ravens defensive coordinator Zach Orr will help develop him, but I think that that's a huge steal potentially at 59 at close to the end of the second round. Then drafting a guy like even a LeJontay Webster out of Colorado in the 6th round, I think that could provide another weapon potentially in terms of not only special teams, but at times at different packages at the wide receiver position, but also in special teams for sure. And I think the real question from the Ravens drafting, which is not necessarily the most significant position, but it can be at times too because you need them to win the game, drafting a kicker, Tyler Loop out of Arizona in the 6th round. We of course know the allegations against Justin Tucker. We know that he was one of the best kickers of all time, but your play only gets you so far if you're not doing stuff right off of the field, and we know what he's been accused of. It makes things interesting drafting a kicker, so we'll see what that impedes on them. But I think that the Baltimore Ravens, I probably grade their draft having a B, a straight B, because I mean they're a contending team. They already have a lot of good weapons. I think it's going to be interesting to see the tight end thing because there's been rumors about Mark Andrews and a contract extension not being fulfilled. We'll see there. They obviously have Isaiah Likely too, so we'll see there. But I like overall what they did, drafting Emory Jones Jr. from LSU in the 3rd round as well, a tackle, just to provide some depth in that room, drafting a linebacker, and Teddy Buchanan, I know I butchered his name, out of Cal, and other positions of that nature, so I'll give the Ravens a B. For the Cincinnati Bengals, I like what they did drafting Ed Shamar Stewart. I think it was pretty obvious that the Bengals, regardless of the situation, were going to go defense in the 1st round, just considering how putrid they were on the defensive side in the 2024 season. And now with questions with Trey Hendrickson still not being extended yet, that was very integral for them to do. I also like them drafting a Demetrius Knight Jr. in the 2nd round from South Carolina, who had a really good good defense with other weapons drafted to different teams that we'll talk about later. At the linebacker position, I think that he adds some depth to that room and another weapon that can get not only into coverage but also rush the passer at times as well and help stop the run. And I think my favorite pick from the Cincinnati Bengals is drafting running back out of Texas Tech, Taj Brooks. I think that he was one of the best running backs in the nation. Like I said, this draft class was very deep at that running back position, so some were bound to fall into the cracks, like not only a Taj Brooks but even a Damian Martinez, who we'll talk about later when we get to the NFC West for the Seahawks. But Taj Brooks last year, I mean, he had over 1,500 rushing yards and 17 touchdowns, averaging 5.3 yards per carry. So I think that he'll be able to add another element of their offense in the running game, along with having running back Chase Brown, who had a really good year in 2024, running for over 1,100 yards and 7 touchdowns too. So I like how they helped out their offense. Also drafting the guard in the 3rd round, Dylan Fairchild from Georgia. But like I said, really drafting defensively for the Bengals was key, and I think that they helped themselves there. But I think that they'll help themselves the most if they can somehow come to agreement with Trey Hendrickson, similarly to what they did with T. Higgins and Jamar Chase earlier in this offseason. But yeah, if I had to grade the Bengals, I'd probably give them a B-. I think I like what they did in the draft. They only had 6 overall picks, but with those 6 picks, I think that they were able to make a solid impact to their roster. And lastly, with the Pittsburgh Steelers, I know this may be surprising because of the lack of addressing quarterback at a higher position. I'm probably going to give them a B, and I know that's probably surprising. They didn't draft a quarterback until the 6th round, and Will Howard, who, yes, he showed some good signs at Ohio State, but obviously a different type of quarterback and not the most potential in the quarterback prospect. But I like what they did in the earlier rounds. Drafting in the 1st round, Derek Harmon, I know that was very polarizing. A lot of people expected them to draft Shedeur Sanders, and if they didn't draft Shedeur at that spot, maybe drafted Jalen Milroe in the 3rd round if he slipped there, which he did. But he drafted defensive tackle Derek Harmon, who y'all all know the heartbreaking story of his mom passing away and him telling her that he got drafted right before she passed. Praying that he does well with the Steelers as well too. It's always more than football, guys. Remember that. But very happy for him, and I like that pick of defensive tackle. Some people may think that maybe thought that was a reach, and you know everyone's draft board was different with this year's draft. But I think that he'll help in that defensive tackle room. They'll learn from players like a Cam Hayward and Highsmith and T.J. Watt, of course. But also I like what they did in the 3rd round. They didn't have a 2nd round pick because they traded for DK Metcalf from the Seahawks earlier in this offseason. But in the 3rd round, they were able to draft Caleb Johnson, who I was surprised slipped that far. Thought he would be drafted in the 2nd round, but I think him at the running back position, they just lost Najee Harris to the Los Angeles Chargers, but they still have a Jalen Warren, and having Caleb Johnson to complement that running back room, I think that he'll be really good for them. Had a really good season at Iowa last year, rushing for over 1,500 rushing yards and 21 touchdowns as well, with 6.4 yards per carry. He'll add definitely a good presence in that room. So like I said, I'll give the Steelers a B grade, but that quarterback position is going to be a very damning one because your quarterback room right now is Mason Rudolph, Skylar Thompson, and Will Howard. You're waiting on Aaron Rodgers, which I really think that that's just stupid in my opinion, because you're just delaying the inevitable, because you're going to need a long-term answer at the quarterback position. You've been looking for one since Ben Roethlisberger. You didn't keep Justin Fields. Kenny Pickett didn't work out, so what are you going to do? Because that's going to be a lingering question, whether it's in next year's draft or whatever. But the Steelers, I think they had a solid draft, but we'll see what they do, because I think that until they have a quarterback, they still don't matter. I still think the division is going to come down to either the Ravens or the Bengals, though, as long as both teams stay healthy and the Bengals don't start off slow, because you know that's a huge thing with them. Now moving to the Kansas City Chiefs, I think that they had a boring but good draft, and what I mean by that is they drafted for meat and potatoes. Drafted an offensive tackle in the 1st round of Josh Simmons from Ohio State, who yes had an injury last season but showed great flashes, and I think that he is going to be a good complement in terms of being a tackle for the future for Patrick Mahomes to help block for his blind side. Then in the 2nd round, drafting Amar Norman Lott, defensive tackle for Tennessee, just providing some more defensive depth on that defensive line to help stop the run and create some potential pass rush. Drafting the edge in the 3rd round and Ashton Gillett from Louisville to help defensively. I think I really also like a pick in Jalen Broyles at wide receiver in the 4th round from Utah State. Just another weapon for insurance just in case, because we know Rashee Rice getting hurt last year. Xavier Worthy, he showed some good flashes in his rookie season, but still you want to make sure you continue to bolster that wide receiver room and have some assets and weapons for Patrick Mahomes. Also keeping Hollywood Brown was really good for them too. So I do like what they did. And then also in the 3rd round, drafting cornerback Noel Williams from California. I think that he'll help their defense and coverage as well too. Losing a player like Justin Reed, it's hard to replace him, but just addressing that need, you never know what type of success you can hit on a draft pick, especially in the 3rd round. So I like that. In the 5th round, drafting Jeffrey Bassa from Oregon at linebacker position, and also running back Brashard Smith from SMU. I think that Brashard Smith pick will be an absolute steal in the running game, be able to complement a player like Isaiah Pacheco, who dealt with some injury last year too. So I like what the Chiefs did. If you notice a lot from this video, there will be a lot of B's, because I think a lot of teams really did have some good drafts, and it's hard to compare that until the season starts. But I think that the the Chiefs had a B. I think I like their draft. Some people had rated them as an A- or on other websites, depending on where you find around the BC area as well too. They had 7 draft picks, and I think that they were able to address some areas that will help be key for them and helping them try to rebuild a 3-time Super Bowl champion, because we saw how they got embarrassed in that game against the Eagles. They're definitely going to be wanting their lick back, that crown back in terms of being one of the best teams in the league, and this in ways helped them. Though I do think that they'll win the AFC West next year, but a team that I think surprised a lot of people last year in the AFC West, the Denver Broncos. They had a really good year under Bo Nix. I talked about it earlier. He had a really good rookie season, was able to connect a good rapport with players like Cortland Sutton. It didn't have the best running game, but they did try to help address that in drafting a running back in the 2nd round, RJ Harvey out of UCF, who will help them after losing a player like Javonte Williams, who didn't have the best production last year. That helps bring a potential back that will help improve that running game. And I really think them drafting Jahdae Barron, I really love that pick. I think, in my opinion, he was one of the top 15 picks in this draft. So getting him at 20 overall, that'll help complement a player like a Pat Surtain, your reigning defensive player of the year, and that defense who really just improved a lot. Adding 2 players from the 49ers in Hufanga and Dre Greenlaw to an already top 10 defense in 2024. That's going to help not only defensively, of course, but offensively as well too, because it's going to deter the opposing team from scoring points. And I also like them in the 3rd round, drafting a player like a Savion Jones at edge from LSU and wide receiver Pat Bryant from Illinois. So I like what they did in the draft. I probably give them a B+ because that Jahdae Barron pick, I really like it. I think that he can have the potential to be a Pro Bowl type of cornerback. We saw the type of elite ball skills that he had at UT last season. I really like that pick with them drafting RJ Harvey as well too. I think it puts them in great position to have another good year, potentially make the playoffs as a wild card, because I still think that the Kansas City Chiefs, as long as Mahomes stays healthy, they'll win a division. But I wouldn't be surprised if the Broncos have a season like they had last year, like around 11 games or something like that too. Moving on to the Las Vegas Raiders, I'm giving them an A grade in the draft because yes, they drafted the obvious pick in Ashton Jeanty at the running back position, where it hasn't been as popular to draft a running back in the 1st round lately, although we saw 2 early running backs picked in 2023 in Jahmyr Gibbs and Bijan Robinson, who have been some of the best backs in the league. I think Ashton Jeanty, he provides instant impact in that area out the gate. Now, their offensive line in Las Vegas is far from great. We saw that for sure, but his roster is definitely improved, not only improving at the quarterback position in Geno Smith, but they still have a weapon in Brock Bowers, who you can make was the best rookie pass catcher in last year's class at the tight end position, which no one expected him to have the type of season that he had, having 112 receptions for almost 1,200 receiving yards and 5 touchdowns, had 8th in receiving yards across the whole league at that tight end position. So I think that he's their best weapon for sure, but Ashton Jeanty is going to help complement that too. But I like what they did in the draft as well, because they drafted Jack Beck out of TCU at that wide receiver position, who I think he's a really good wide receiver. He's not necessarily a burner, but he can make contested catches, and he'll be a great additive weapon to Brock Bowers, which will help open up that receiving game, but will open up as well too because of the running back within Ashton Jeanty. And you have a more than competent quarterback in Geno Smith, who's probably a top 12 to 15 quarterback in this league. Not a superstar, but a really good quarterback, and he improves tremendously what they had in that room in the previous regime. And I think Pete Carroll is going to really add his identity on this roster. And then drafting cornerback Darian Porter out of Iowa State in the 3rd round, that'll help their defensive back room. And then I mentioned them not having really a strong offensive line at all. They're attempting to improve that room, because drafting Ashton Jeanty in the 1st round, you need to get some offensive linemen in some rounds. They drafted guard Caleb Rogers out of Texas Tech and offensive tackle Charles Grant in the 3rd round out of William & Mary. So some different weapons, some potential developmental weapons who can help with your run game and put Ashton Jeanty in great positions to succeed. So I think I really like their draft. I think that they have an A. I think that this Raiders team will certainly be improved over the 4-13 season that they had last year. Could potentially even win like around 7 games, because like I said, Pete Carroll, he has that championship pedigree, won a Super Bowl with the Seahawks, but also won in college back in the day with USC, so he knows what it takes to win. So I think that the Raiders had a really good draft, and I'm going to give them an A grade. And lastly, with the Los Angeles Chargers, I'm going to give them an A- grade, because drafting running back Omarion Hampton out of North Carolina, who was the 2nd best back in this class after Ashton Jeanty, I think that's huge to help Justin Herbert even further, who had a really good running game last year in the 1st year under Jim Harbaugh and that new regime. They made the playoffs. Yes, they got smoked by the Texans in the 1st round, but they did make the playoffs when no one really expected that. And they had a really good running game with J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards. So adding a young running back who can be a running back of the future in Omarion Hampton, I think that's going to bode well for them. And they also brought in Najee Harris, so they can have a 2-back system there under offensive coordinator Greg Roman, who we know loves to run the football, but also they helped their receiving game, which was pretty strong last year, as they drafted Ladd McConkey in the second round, who's one of the best rookies in the league and one of the best pass catchers in the league, period. They added another wide receiver to that room in a Trey Harris out of Mississippi in the second round, one of the probably top 10 receiving prospects in this year's draft class. I like that because that adds another big body target that can go get the football for Justin Herbert and add some versatility with a guy like a Ladd McConkey and a guy who I know hasn't panned out as well to many expectations in a Quentin Johnson, but he had an improved year from his rookie season in 2023. That adds some weapons to that room, and they also brought back Mike Williams, who was there in 2023 and beforehand, so that helps with some familiarity and some more weapons for Justin Herbert. So I think those two picks alone justify their A- rating. They drafted defensive tackle Jamari Caldwell out of Oregon, edge Kyle Kennard out of South Carolina, another defensive weapon for that South Carolina defense, which was ranked the 16th best defense in the country, and another wide receiver for insurance as well in the 5th round, Keandre Lambert-Smith. I really like what the Chargers did in this draft. Jim Harbaugh is continuing to have his footprint on this franchise, and I expect the Chargers to be in contention as well for another year in that playoffs, and I wouldn't be surprised if the same thing happened again like last year. The Chiefs, the Broncos, and the Chargers making the playoffs. We'll see how improved the Raiders are under Pete Carroll and Geno Smith with better quarterback play, but I think that really all four teams had a really good draft in the AFC West. Now moving to the AFC East, we all recognize and know that the Buffalo Bills are still the king of this division, have won the division 5 years in a row, have the best quarterback in the division by far, and arguably the second best quarterback in the league, depending on who you ask. Y'all know the big four in Patrick Mahomes, Joe Burrow, Josh Allen, and Lamar Jackson, but you have one of those quarterbacks in the Josh Allen who you'll have multiple windows to win with, and we saw last year they kind of gutted some of their roster because they needed to fit around that inevitable contract extension which they just signed Josh Allen to this past offseason. But now they sent a message drafting a cornerback in Maxwell Hairston out of Kentucky at the 30 overall pick, who I think is going to be an instant impact to that defense. I like his ball hawking ability that he showcased at Kentucky. Had a pick 6 this past year in 2024, but if you look at his 2023 tape, I think that's where he shines the most. He had 5 interceptions and 2 pick 6s, had 66 total tackles in that season. I think that he's going to be an additive great weapon for the Buffalo Bills, and I like that pick there. And then drafting defensive tackle TJ Sanders out of South Carolina, another South Carolina defensive player, like I mentioned with the Chargers. That defense ranked 16th overall. He's going to be able to be another piece to help that defense and run stopping under head coach Sean McDermott, who prides himself on having a really good and sound disciplined defense. They also drafted edge Landon Jackson in round 3, which I think could be one of the biggest steals in this draft. Out of Arkansas, 6'6". I think he's going to be able to provide some good pass rush and some intensity into that defensive room, so I like that pick as well. And just really beefing up the defense even more, drafting defensive tackle Deon Walker out of Kentucky, who I think was one of the more underrated defensive draft prospects in this draft. Same with a cornerback Jordan Hancock out of Ohio State, who was a part of the 2024 NCAA championship team. Then another tight end to that room with already having Dawson Knox and Dalton Kincaid, drafting tight end Jackson Halls out of Georgia Tech, another cornerback in Dorian Strong, and an offensive tackle Chase Lunt out of UConn, and another wide receiver Caden Prather out of Maryland. So I think that I'll probably give the Bills a B grade. They already are a championship contender, and they just keep running into the Chiefs. And Josh Allen, he just had his best season, having an MVP year. So I think that them going very defense heavy in this draft just helps make sure their defense is even more sound. A lot of people will probably scrutinize them not drafting a wide receiver in the earlier rounds. They just signed Khalil Shakir to a contract extension. They still have Keon Coleman, who I think had a promising rookie year despite missing some time, but was able to make an impact when he was in. Also have Curtis Samuel as well too. So we saw that wide receiver by committee approach work. I know that James Cook is wanting a contract extension, so we'll see about that, because we know that the Bills, they are run first team under offensive coordinator Joe Brady, but I really like what they did, and I'll give them a B grade on this draft. For the Miami Dolphins, I know a lot of people probably weren't impressed with them. I'm going to give them a B- for their grade, but I actually kind of like what they did, and they drafted defensive tackle Kenneth Grant out of Michigan, who I think for sure is a first round pick. I think might have been a little bit of a reach. I would have drafted a player they're looking for defensive tackle, like maybe even potentially Walter Nolan over him, but that's just my personal opinion, and he can easily prove me wrong because he can help be a good run stopper for that team, and he had a good impact, and he had a great impact on that 2023 Michigan team that won a national championship. But I think that was a little bit of reach, but that's just my personal opinion. I like some of what they did though in the later rounds in drafting defensive tackle, specifically Jordan Phillips out of Maryland, who I thought would have been drafted before then. So I think that he'll be another defensive tackle that'll be able to help shake up that room as well too with a Kenneth Grant. Really, my opinion why I give the Dolphins a B- rating and not like a C like other people have given them is because I like what they did with Ollie Gordon II. I know that he didn't have a great year in 2024. Really, Oklahoma State, they had a bad year overall. It was an awful year for sure, don't get me wrong. But if you look at his 2023 tape, he was the best running back in the country that year. In 2023 specifically, he ran for over 1,700 rushing yards and had 21 rushing touchdowns, averaging 6.6 6.1 yards per carry. He was an All-American that year, even finished 7th overall in Heisman voting. So I think that shows what he's potentially capable of. And now he's going to be in the offense with a Devon Achane, who's been really good for them throughout the past couple of years. So he'll be a complimentary back who has a big frame at 6'2", 225 pounds. That'll be able to help the running game in Miami. So getting him in the 6th round, 179 overall, I think that's a steal in my opinion with those factors. And even drafting a player like a Quinn Ewers in the 7th round. We know the type of hesitancy that the Dolphins have. Yes, they signed Tua Tagovailoa to that contract extension in 2024 last season, but we saw he missed time with that concussion injury, and we've seen him miss time in the 2022 season as well. 2023 was his most healthy year, played every single game. Didn't end the way that they wanted to, but yes, they made the playoffs. But now in a lackluster season like last year, I think that Quinn Ewers adds another backup. They signed Zach Wilson as well too, so it'll be interesting to see. God willing, hopefully nothing happens to Tua. Hopefully he's able to have a year like 2023 where he's really good and is able to stay healthy. But just in case, they have some insurance there potentially. And I don't even know what's going to go on with Jalen Ramsey. We know that they plan to part ways and seek a trade there. So I would have expected them to draft cornerback earlier, but they did draft cornerback and Jason Marshall Jr. from Florida in the 5th round. So we'll see how he's able to translate. Obviously in the 5th round, you're not even necessarily guaranteed a spot on the roster. So I don't know what they'll do there, what type of value that they'll get in compensation from a Jalen Ramsey. But like I said, I'll give them a B- for the draft. I expect them to hopefully be improved. You know, the Tyreek Hill type of trade rumors and things of that nature. They signed Jalen Waddle to that contract extension last year, so it seems at least he'll be secure there in his future. But Tyreek Hill is a question mark. But I do kind of like what the Dolphins did. Don't necessarily know the expectations I'll have on them yet. I still think that the Bills will win the division again for a 6th year in a row. But I'll give the Dolphins a B- grade. And moving on to the New York Jets, I really like what they did. I'm going to give them an A- because they have a lot of good draft picks that I like. In the 1st round, drafting Armand Membu, that was probably a chalk pick. A lot of people expecting them to go offensive tackle to add protection to their new quarterback Justin Fields and to help their running game and things of that nature with Breece Hall and still having weapons like a Garrett Wilson. But I really like the weapon that they added in the 2nd round at number 42 overall, and tight end Mason Taylor. I think that he was one of the most underrated tight ends in this class. I think that he had a really good performance at the Senior Bowl, and just looking at the practices and tape of him overall, I like what he's able to do and add a security blanket to Justin Fields in that offense. I really like that pick. But in the 3rd round, they were able to draft Azariah Thomas, who really you can make the argument should have been drafted at the end of the 1st round. Cornerback out of Florida State. I think that he's really going to be able to help that cornerback room with a Sauce Gardner really instantly, because I think that's a great value pick right there in the 3rd round with Azariah Thomas. And even in the 4th round, drafting a player like a Malachi Moore out of Alabama, I really like that pick. So we'll see what they're able to do. Aaron Glenn, of course, former defensive coordinator of the Detroit Lions, also played cornerback for the New York Jets back in the day in the 90s. I think that he's really bringing his culture onto this New York Jets team and trying to shake up something and make the playoffs for the first time since 2010, which is a long time. Shoot, I was 8 years old then, guys. 22 now, so that's definitely a long time. And I don't necessarily expect them to make the playoffs this year, but I do expect them to be a little bit better than 5-12, and I think that they had an A- overall draft grade. That might be a little bit polarizing, but I really like what they were able to do. Now, the New England Patriots, in my opinion, they won the draft in the AFC overall, especially in this division, but overall, in my opinion, people might disagree with that, but I have them with an A+ overall grade. Drafting offensive tackle Will Campbell out of LSU, that was a chalk pick. A lot of people expected that. I think that he's going to be a great weapon for them in the future in terms of being your left tackle for the future and has a type of all-pro type of potential. We saw what he was able to do at LSU, being arguably the best offensive lineman in the country, but protecting 2 different types of quarterback in a Jaden Daniels in 2023 and also a Garrett Nussmeier in 2024. I think that he's going to be able to protect Drake May's blind side for a decade plus and be a potential all-pro type of player at the left tackle position. Will help pass block at a high level, but also in the running game as well. And they really help bolster their running game because they already have Ramondre Stevenson, who's a solid back, but they also drafted Travion Henderson in the 2nd round, and I absolutely love that pick. I didn't necessarily expect him to go to the Patriots, but you can really tell that Mike Vrabel is finding guys that he knows have winning culture and that are going to be able to make an impact instantly. Travion Henderson, he did have an injury a couple years ago at Ohio State, but he had a really good season this past year, being a huge piece and reason why Ohio State won the national championship. And he has true home run ability, ran for over 1,000 yards, averaging 7.1 yards per carry with 10 rushing touchdowns, and that's what splitting carries with Quinshon Judkins. And we'll know that he'll have a secondary role off jump with Ramondre Stevenson, but I wouldn't be surprised if at some point, if he's playing strong and gets a majority or more of those snaps, just depending on how the season goes. So I think Travion Henderson will be really good for them in their offense, and I love that pick. Another pick that I love as well is Kyle Williams in the 3rd round, wide receiver out of Washington State. I think that he should have been picked in the 2nd round, and I think that he'll be a great weapon to that Patriots offense too. They just signed Stephon Diggs, but Kyle Williams will be another weapon for Drake May, who really didn't have a lot of weapons at all in his rookie year. So I think that the Patriots, they did a really good job of just improving this team overall, offensively and defensively. Drafting corner Jared Wilson out of Georgia in the 3rd round, safety Craig Woodson in the 4th round from California, also defensive tackle Joshua Farmer out of Florida State. I think that's a sneaky good pick as well there too. So I think that they had an A+ draft, and that's not even the other players that I mentioned, because they drafted 11 overall players in this draft this year. So I really like what they did, and I think in the AFC they had one of the best drafts, and I'm giving them an A+ grade. But with that being said, let's gonna move on to the NFC. So starting off in the NFC, we're gonna talk about the NFC North, one of the best divisions in football last season, of course, with the Detroit Lions, the Green Bay Packers, and the Minnesota Vikings making the playoffs. The Vikings making the playoffs, but as a wild card, going 14-3 because the Lions won the division for a 2nd year in a row. Packers losing in the 1st round. And we'll go on and start off with the Green Bay Packers, talking about them specifically because they were the host city of the NFL draft, and I thought they really made some good picks throughout this draft class. For their grade, I'll probably give them around a B+. I love what they did drafting Matthew Golden in the 1st round, really just falling into their laps at the 23rd pick overall, and being their first wide receiver drafted for Green Bay since my birth year in 2002, which is wild, 23 years. I think he's going to fit seamlessly, and he's a receiver that Green Bay's offense was missing in terms of the type of juice that he has, and it's going to be intriguing to see who they keep on this roster, because if you look currently at the Green Bay Packers receiving core, they have Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs, Jaden Reed, Dontavian Wicks, McCole Hardman, among others, and now you add a Matthew Golden. It's going to be interesting to see if one of these players gets traded. I remember earlier throughout the season some speculation about Romeo Doubs potentially being disgruntled in his role. It'll be intriguing if a team like the Dallas Cowboys, who have been rumored to be in the market for a wide receiver too, as a Cowboys fan, they need a wide receiver too, if they try to make a trade for something like that, because there's only so many receptions that can go around. But I do love that pick of Matthew Golden, a real weapon for Jordan Love. As we famously know, he ran a 4.29 40-yard dash at the NFL Combine, and he had a really good 2nd half of the season with UT last year, especially how he played in the playoffs. I really love that Matthew Golden pick. And then I also love another pick that they had later in the 3rd round, drafting another wide receiver in Savion Williams, kind of a Swiss Army knife of a receiver, can of course catch the ball but get things out of the backfield as well, and be a really versatile type of weapon for the Packers. So I love that pick. So that's actually another receiver there added to the list that I just mentioned. But I do like what they did, and they also drafted Matthew Golden's teammate at Texas, Edge Barron Sorrell. I love that pick as well too, just continuing to add more depth to that defense that did really well in its first season under defensive coordinator Jeff Hafley. And you know, on the offensive side with Matt LaFleur, he's going to continue to have that offense centered around Josh Jacobs, but also being well versed to help complement Jordan Love, who they did extend last offseason, to continue to just build a contender in the NFC. We know how they came on the rise and finished out the 2nd half of 2023 very strong, than last year making the playoffs, although losing in the 1st round. This year they're going to try to really contend and try to win the NFC North and win a division this year, and try to get some home field advantage, because that's a big thing, especially at Lambeau Field, that type of advantage at home. So like I said, I probably give the Green Bay Packers a B+ grade. I like what they did in the draft. Have a lot of good weapons on the offensive line too, and they drafted 2 offensive linemen specifically in round 2 with offensive tackle Anthony Belton from NC State. So excited to see what that team does, and I think they had a really good draft. And moving on to the division leaders who won the division for 2 straight years, the Detroit Lions. You know, it's kind of a tough thing with them, especially how the season ended last year, and getting the #1 overall seed and being upset at home against the Washington Commanders, who were steaming hot. That definitely was a hit in the mouth for them. Then losing both of their coordinators offensively, and Ben Johnson, who's now the head coach of the Chicago Bears, and defensive coordinator Aaron Glenn, who's now the head coach of the New York Jets. It's time for some restoration, and I think that the Detroit Lions, they made some solid steps to go there, but I think I'm going to probably give them a B- of a draft, because maybe it was a little bit boring, but it's not the most significant. But I do like some of the moves that they made, but it's just not too eye-popping to me. They drafted Tyleik Williams out of Ohio State, the defensive tackle, which is a good pick to help them bolster their run game, because let's face it, when Aiden Hutchinson got injured last season, their defense was pretty cooked. We saw that they were bringing in and out guys from practice squads, signing guys off the street as well too, and Aaron Glenn, the phenomenal defensive coordinator that he was before being the head coach now for the Jets, he made things work, but it was only so much he could do, and that defense was very vulnerable last season. So drafting defensive tackle Tyleik Williams, I think that helps. On that side, they also drafted the 2nd round a guard Tate Ratledge out of Georgia, and then this is my favorite pick for the Lions in the 3rd round, drafting wide receiver Isaac Tesla from Arkansas. I think he is a very sneaky good wide receiver, and I think that he's very underrated as well too. As we look at his stats, They aren't necessarily the most impressive, 28 receptions for 546 receiving yards and 3 touchdowns. But he is a type of weapon that can be utilized in a great fashion in that offense and provide something different. I think that he has some good film as well too, and he can be a burner at times too. So I like that Isaac Tesla pick. But besides the other ones, I think it's just depth type of center draft. Guard with Miles Frazier from LSU and the edge from Boise State. I'm not going to try to butcher his name, but Amid, I love his game as well too. Coming out of Boise State and that team that was really successful last year, making a college football playoff. I love his story as well too, being from Egypt, things of that nature. And he can really provide something tough to this Detroit Lions group that has an identity under Dan Campbell, which really just adopts physicality and being a grit type of organization, which is in Detroit. So I do love that. So I do like that pick. And like I said, I'll probably give them a B-. I think that the Lions, they should still be favorites to an extent, but I'm not necessarily going to be too fast to say that they're going to win a division, because Green Bay is not too far away, especially with the moves that they made. And I do believe in the Vikings as well too, what they can potentially be. But the Bears too, they're very sneaky as well, and I think that they had a really good draft. And talking about the Bears, I'm giving them an A- of a draft, because I'm not gonna lie, I thought that Tyler Warren was gonna go to the Chicago Bears, but looking at the prototype of tight end, especially with Sam Laporta that Ben Johnson had as offensive coordinator for the Detroit Lions, I guess it makes sense that they did go with Colston Loveland out of Michigan at number 10 overall. And I think that he's going to be another security blanket of a weapon to complement the other tight end that they have in Cole Kmet in Chicago, to just be another weapon overall for that offense. And then they drafted another weapon in Luther Burden, one of my favorite wide receivers in this draft, who certainly should have been a first-round pick in my opinion, but you know how things go. I think that he's going to be another great weapon for this team, who already has DJ Moore, one of the better receivers in the league, and Roma Dunze, who didn't necessarily had the best rookie season, but he still showed some great spurts, and we know how talented he is, being a number 9 overall pick in 2024 draft. So adding Luther Burden to that receiving room, I think it really helps, especially losing a guy like Keenan Allen. I mean, I know he was older. That just really ensures him having no chance of coming back, but Luther Burden being there, he has great yak ability, and I love his game for sure, and he can be a really integral part of this offense starting off in year 1. And then they just really made sure that they made some moves defensively. I do like in the second round also them drafting defensive tackle Shamar Turner out of Texas A&M, drafting offensive tackle in the second round Ozzie Trapilo out of Boston College. Just continuing to add depth and versatility to the offensive line for more protection of Caleb Love. We know the type of trades that they made this season, specifically trading for Joe Tooney out of Kansas City. That's a great offensive lineman that'll be able to help Caleb Williams have some more added protection. So I like what the Bears did, and I'm going to give them an A-. I really do. I wouldn't be surprised. I would probably predict them to win somewhere around 6 to 9 games. It wouldn't surprise me if they made the playoffs, but I still have to see more. I know they have built a lot in that coaching staff, and offensively and defensively, we just have to see it come together like most things. But I do like what the Bears did. I'm going to give them an A- of a grade. And then moving on to Skull Nation with the Minnesota Vikings. Nothing too crazy from their draft. I'll probably give them around a B-. It's crazy because the lowest grades I've given so far throughout this video has been a B-, because they just did not average, but they just did some solid moves, I would say. Drafting a guard, Donovan Jackson out of Ohio State, another lineman that can protect JJ McCarthy and just continue to build up that offensive line. We saw what that offensive line did against the Rams pass rush in round 1 of the NFL playoffs, and there's a lot of combinations to that. I think that a lot of it was also Sam Darnold holding on to the ball too long, and I think JJ McCarthy may be a little bit more mobile, and he is younger than a Sam Darnold, so maybe you won't have those same type of issues. We'll see how that continues to go throughout the season, but I do like that pick of Donovan Jackson. And then in the third round, drafting wide receiver Ty Felton out of Maryland, an underrated receiver in this class. I think that there was a lot of underrated receivers in this draft. Like I said earlier, a lot of people are overrating and not taking into consideration of the depth of this draft at the wide receiver position. I think Ty Felton adds to a room already that's pretty stacked with a Justin Jefferson and a Jordan Addison, so just another weapon for JJ McCarthy and the rest of Kevin O'Connell's offense to utilize for sure. And nothing too crazy. The Vikings only had 5 draft picks. I do kind of like the Kobe King pick in the 6th round from Penn State, the linebacker, just being able to add to that stacked defense that we saw really go crazy last year under defensive coordinator Brian Flores. I'll probably give the Vikings a B- grade. I think that they'll be in the mix for sure. That division is going to be tough because they're just going to be beating on each other for sure. I wouldn't be surprised if 3 teams make the playoffs again like last year, similarly like I talked about with the AFC West, but we will see. I think all of these teams had solid drafts, but the best draft in this whole division, I think, came from the Chicago Bears. For the NFC South, South, we know that the Buccaneers have won this division for the past 5 years. They've really owned it, similar to how the Bills have owned the AFC East. And I think that they added some more weapons offensively and defensively that'll help ensure them having a similar type of success in the 2025 season. Drafting Emeka Egbuka, wide receiver out of Ohio State, I think surprised a lot of people in terms of them having Mike Evans, Chris Godwin coming back on a new 3-year contract extension, along with how McMillan played last year. Another wide receiver, I guess that kind of shapes up things in terms of them having a wide receiver for the future while also learning under those players like a Mike Evans, a future Hall of Famer, and Chris Godwin. So I do like that pick, Emeka Egbuka. I think that he's the receiver with the highest floor in this draft. Maybe not the highest potential, but I think that he's going to have an instant impact to that Tampa Bay roster and provide another weapon for Baker Mayfield in that high power offense. And in the second round, I really love this pick. Drafting cornerback Benjamin Morrison, who had some really good tape in 2023, specifically against a player like Marvin Harrison Jr. Last year, he suffered an injury, but he's a really good cornerback, and I think that he fulfills a need for that Tampa Bay defense. As long as he returns to training camp healthy and things of that nature, I think that he's going to help provide a need at that cornerback position, which was very vulnerable at times in coverage last year that we saw in their key matchups. Benjamin Morrison can be a really good player for them and going into the future. And Jacob Parrish at the cornerback position in the third round from Kansas State. I think that's another weapon just to continue to have some mix of versatility and more corners to help build a stronger coverage on that defense. I really like their picks. They also drafted edge David Walker from Central Arkansas in the 4th round, another edge in Elijah Roberts in the 5th round from SMU, and then finally in round 7 with our final pick, drafted wide receiver Tej Johnson, will be the lightest player in the league, but we saw in Oregon he had some really good spurts, and they drafted Emeka Egbuka. Went on a tangent about the wide receiver room, so adding Tej Johnson to that, I hope for his sake he's able to make the roster, but even if not there, he'll be able to make an impact wherever he is. Because despite being small, there's still roles for players like that in the league, whether it's in special teams or whether it's in different packages offensively. So shout out to Tej Johnson for getting drafted. I think the Tampa Bay Buccaneers did really good in this draft. They didn't have the most picks, only had 6 picks, but those 6 picks were significant and will help them to a heavy veteran roster, and I'm probably going to grade them around a B+. Now moving on to the Carolina Panthers, I'm still very sick about them drafting T-Mac because I felt like they were going to go defense, and like I said, I'm a Dallas Cowboys fan. I really wanted a wide receiver 2 opposite of CeeDee Lamb, and I'm pretty annoyed that they drafted Tet, so I can't wait for the Cowboys to play against them. Hopefully the Cowboys are improved so they can murder them, but not for real though. That's just me saying that I really love that pick, and I love how T-Mac of a player is, and I talked about it in my previous videos talking about this draft class. Tedero McMillan has the potential to be an all-pro receiver in my opinion in the future. A lot of people compared him to a Mike Evans type or a Michael Thomas type or even a T. Higgins type, and I can see a lot of those comparisons because he's a guy that'll just go up and get the ball. A lot of people made a big deal about his 40 time being near a 4.5 or things of that nature. Football speed, 40 time speed is very different, and it's about what you show on that field. But I think the Panthers drafting T-Mac is going to be really good for Bryce Young, a weapon that can just go up and get the ball to complement a wide receiver like Xavier Legette already. And then I also love a pick that they did in the 2nd round, drafting edge Nick Sorton from Texas A&M, just to help bolster up that defense. And I initially thought that they were going to probably go round 1 and round 2 at defense, but of course in round 1 they went with T-Mac. But Nick Sorton, he was really good in that defense at the edge position for Texas A&M alongside a player like a Shamar Stewart who was drafted in the 1st round. And they also drafted in the 3rd round edge Princely Imimelin out of Ole Miss. And I like what they did drafting running back Trevor Etienne, of course younger brother of Travis Etienne, but running back out of Georgia. Just another running back to add to that room. In the offseason they signed Rico Dowdle to a deal. We know they have Chuba Hubbard, who recently signed a contract extension, and Jonathan Brooks, who unfortunately got injured, but he adds to the depth of that room as well, and I like that move. Then just added some more key defensive needs in the later rounds in the tight end and Mitchell Evans and wide receiver and Jimmy Horn Jr. So I'll probably give the Panthers around a B. I like them drafting T-Mac a lot and drafting Nick Sorton and Princely Imimelin. I know I said his name wrong probably, but it's all good. I just don't know where they necessarily fit in this division because, yeah, Bryce Young, he really did finish off very well in the second half of the season when he got the starting job back from Andy Dalton, but it's just tough to really view this team in my opinion. We got to see how their defense is, but I do like what they did in the draft for sure. Now for the Saints, I like what they did in the 1st round, drafting a Kelvin Banks Jr. just to add some protection for whoever was going to be at quarterback, and they had to draft a quarterback. Like, don't get me wrong, but I think Shador would have been really good for this situation, but they like Tyler Shuck and they drafted him in the 2nd round. I think that he was a 3rd round grade quarterback in my opinion, but hey, maybe I'm wrong with that. We'll see. He's going to be an older rookie, 26 years old, but I think that bodes well for him. Like I said, in terms of these quarterbacks who have hopped in the league having that experience, because as long as he can stay healthy, that'll help him. But I'm not sure, man, because I know a lot of Saints fans, they wanted a Shedeur Sanders or would have even taken a player like a Jalen Milroe, who I think have a higher upside than a Tyler Shuck. But we'll see. I mean, it's for him to step in and be the quarterback that can help lead that team. I'm just not sure. I'm not convinced under Kellen Moore. I mean, Kellen Moore, I feel like he'll be a good coach. We saw that he's capable of being a really good play caller from his time at Dallas, and of course last year being a part of the Super Bowl champions in the Philadelphia Eagles. But I'm just not really satisfied by that move. I do like a draft pick that they had in the 4th round, drafting linebacker Danny Stutzman, a guy that'll just be able to potentially be used in special teams but add to their defense as well. And also a player like Devin Neal, running back out of Kansas, in the 6th round. I think that's a real steal. I think he's a really good running back. Well, he's one of the many running backs in this class that I liked and evaluated a lot on tape, and I think is really going to be able to be utilized well, not only out of the backfield but also as a pass catcher. Love his game, but I'm not necessarily too moved on the Saints draft, and I'm not going to lie, I'm going to have to give them a C+ grade. They had a couple of moves I liked, but I'm not too convinced on them, and I really don't think the Saints are going to be that good next year too, if I have to be real. For the final team in the NFC South, we have to talk about the Atlanta Falcons, and they were very aggressive in this first round. It was clear that they were only looking to draft defensive players heavily in this draft, and they showed that. They even traded a first round pick for the 2026 draft to the Rams so they could get back in the first round and draft the James Pierce Jr. But I do like what they did drafting edge Jalen Walker out of Georgia. I think he was one of the best defensive players in this draft. He's going to be able to provide an instant impact, and same with James Pierce Jr., edge out of Tennessee. So those are two players you can just stick into Raheem Morris's defense immediately and have waves of pass rush that they didn't have last year. Had one of the weakest pass rushes, I believe, in the NFL this past season, so they're immediately clearing that up and making sure that they set the tone defensively. And I like what they did in the 3rd round. At the 96th overall pick, they picked safety Xavier Watts out of Notre Dame. He had some good plays in the college football playoff and overall this season throughout Notre Dame's success in their long playoff run. Love that pick. And then also an underrated one in my opinion as well too is drafting safety Billy Bowman Jr. out of Oklahoma, and the only offensive pick that they had was in round 7, offensive tackle Jack Nelson out of Wisconsin. 4 out of their 5 picks were defensive, and I like that. I really do. I'm probably going to give the Falcons a B grade because they went into this draft knowing that they needed some defensive firepower and some help, and I do like that type of mentality. So they don't get the lowest grade in this division. The Saints definitely do. I think the Saints will be at the bottom of the division again, unfortunately for my Louisiana people, but you never know. But yeah, the Falcons, I'll probably give them a B grade, but in this NFC South division, I still think that the Bucks will be on top. Now for the second to last division, we're going to talk about the NFC West, and I like what a lot of these teams did. Particularly first, we're going to start off with the Arizona Cardinals, drafting a Walter Nolan in the 1st round, 16 overall. I know for some boards, he was high on some lists and was at the back of the 1st round of some others, but I think what he did for Ole Miss, and before that when he was at Texas A&M, being one of the top recruits in the country for the class of 2022 coming out of high school, I think that he's going to be really key to Jonathan Gannon's defense in terms of stopping the run and just being a presence on that defensive line. But I think something that really just elevated their grade in my opinion is drafting a Will Johnson in the 2nd round. Now a lot of teams were scared away from the potential knee injury that he had, some rumors about a transplant in the knee as well too, so that's definitely concerning. But if he can replicate the level of player that he was at Michigan before the injury, and even last season before he got injured, had a pretty good season, had a couple of interceptions as well too, I think that the Cardinals will potentially have the steal of the draft, drafting a top 10 talent at number 47 overall in the 2nd round. So I think that really bodes well for that team. And it's ironic how Will Johnson is not going to be on the same team as Marvin Harrison Jr. Those two had some great battles while each other were both in college at Ohio State and at Michigan. Walter Nolan in the 1st round and Will Johnson. Also drafting another defensive player in the 3rd round, edge Jordan Burch out of Oregon. I love that pick as well. It's another underrated defensive player. I think that he could have gone in the 2nd round, but I also saw on some boards he was a 3rd round level player too. So good value there. And then they just continue to add to the defensive side, drafting linebacker Cody Simon out of Ohio State in round 4, cornerback Denzel Burke out of Ohio State as well too. So 2 Ohio State players, also a Michigan player in the 2nd round, and then drafting a guard and Hayden Conner out of Texas, and finally in the 7th round drafting safety Keaton Crawford out of Nevada. So I think I really like the Cardinals draft. They improved a lot with Kyler Murray being healthy for pretty much the entire season last year. And if I have to give the Cardinals a grade, I'd probably give them an A-. There's not really too much more I think that they could have done. I mean, I think they just followed their board, and it seems like they approached the best player available, particularly in the 2nd round, for Will Johnson, because I really think that he's a top 10 player. On my top 10 draft prospects video, I had him in the top 10 as well too. So as long as he's healthy, I think that that's going to be a great selection, and I like what the Arizona Cardinals did. So their grade is an A-. Then moving on to the Seattle Seahawks, I'm going to give them a B+. I really like them drafting Gray Zabel out of North Dakota State in the 1st round at 18 overall. He's a good offensive lineman that's had some protection for Sam Darnold, and also in the future potentially when Jalen Milroe will inevitably, in my opinion, take the helm, because Sam Darnold is signed to a 3-year deal. But if he shows any slippage from the season that he had last year in Minnesota, which is a career year for him last season, but if he's not anything close to that player and he's looking more vulnerable, I think the time could click. But I think it would be a good thing probably for Jalen Muro to be a red shirt this season in terms of learning behind Sam Darnold and maybe having some packages for him because he's an athletic dual threat quarterback. And I'm talking about Jalen Muro so much because I think that was a home run pick in the 3rd round, drafting him at 92 overall. I think that he has the potential to be the quarterback of the future for them, just really cleaning up some sloppy play at times because he has a really good deep ball as well too, but he had some errors last season, particularly in the Vanderbilt game, which Alabama lost. But I think Jalen Muro has a lot of great potential, especially as a dual threat quarterback. But even before the Jalen Muro pick, I love getting safety Nick Imanowore out of South Carolina, another South Carolina prospect that was integral to that 16th ranked defense in the country. I think that he potentially has 1st round talent as well too, so that's a really good value pick there at 35 overall, right at the top of the 2nd round. Then drafting a tight end in Elijah Araro out of Miami. That'll be a safety blanket for a quarterback, and he was really good in the offense with Cam Ward last season. And then I mentioned earlier briefly about their pick in the 7th round, Damian Martinez out of Miami. I really love that pick. Just adding another running back to that room with Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet, adding some insurance just in case one of those players gets injured. And that's a really good running back room. I really like it. And they added 2 offensive linemen as well too, a wide receiver, fullback, and a 2nd wide receiver. So I really like what they did with their draft. I'm going to give them a B+. It's going to be interesting to see what they do this season. Acquiring a player like a Cooper Kupp is another weapon for Sam Darnold to utilize, and of course they have Jackson Smith and Jigba after moving on from DK Metcalf. So we'll see what the Seahawks do, but I like what they did in their draft, and I'm going to give them a B+ of a grade. Now moving on to the San Francisco 49ers, I like what they did as well. I'm going to give them a B+ too. Them drafting defense in the 1st round, it's pretty clear what they were going to do. They had to let a lot of veterans go because they're going to have to sign a player like a Brock Purdy to a max contract extension. They traded Deebo Samuel in the offseason. There's been rumors about potentially trading Brandon Ayuk a year after signing him to that contract extension last year, after they had trade rumors then as well too. So it's interesting to see what they're going to do. They also recently just signed George Kittle to a contract extension, which is well deserved, one of the best tight ends in the game. But speaking about their draft picks though, in round 1 going with edge Michael Williams out of Georgia, I think that's a really good pick. Some people probably had him going a little bit later in the 1st round, like around 15, 16 to the Falcons, around that area, or to the Cardinals. But I love that pick for the 49ers. And then in round 2, a player I really wanted for the Dallas Cowboys. I was very upset when the 49ers selected him, but I don't blame them because he's a really good player. And Alfred Collins in the 2nd round, the defensive tackle out of Texas. Really good, gonna be a huge piece of their defensive line in terms of run stopping and being able to be a physical presence on that defensive line. So I think that's a really good pick there. Linebacker Nick Martin out of Oklahoma State too, that's a really good pick as well. They just added to that defense. I'm telling you, their first 5 picks in the first 4 rounds were all defensive players. You look at round 3 with cornerback Upton Stout out of Western Kentucky. He's actually from the Houston area too, so heard of him before as well too. Just adds another cornerback to that defensive back room, which lost to Travarius Ward to the Indianapolis Colts. I like that pick. And also drafting another defensive tackle in CJ West out of Indiana, which helps the defense as well too. And they also had a pick that I liked a lot in round 5, drafting running back Jordan James out of Oregon. That'll be a really good running back to that room as well. And we know how deep their running back room went through last year, so he may be needed depending on the health of players like a Christian McCaffrey. And hopefully McCaffrey is healthy for this upcoming season, because we saw that he was very limited last year with that Achilles tendonitis, or the injury that he had then, and then getting injured in that Buffalo Bills game. But 49ers, I think they had a really good draft. I'll give them a B+ grade. We'll see how they do this season. We'll see also when they sign Brock Purdy to that contract extension. But I think they had a really good draft. General manager John Lynch and head coach Kyle Shanahan are trying to build their team back into a contender after a down year last season due to injuries and other factors. And with the final team in the NFC West, got to talk about the Los Angeles Rams. First and foremost, love what they did in free agency, signing a player like a Devontae Adams to be paired with Puka Nacua. That's really going to help Matthew Stafford even more. But in the draft, I'd probably give them a B grade, because they had some good picks, some boring picks, but some good picks, because they added a tight end to the room out of Oregon, Terrence Ferguson, which is another target for Matthew Stafford. Drafted an edge in Josiah Stewart out of Michigan, which is going to help that defense, which is very good last year. We saw how dominant they were, even against the Eagles. They barely lost against the Eagles in that game. If it wasn't for a Jalen Carter sack on Matthew Stafford, you can make the case that the Rams would have went to the NFC Championship and maybe to the Super Bowl as well too. So they added more to that defense with a Jared Verse, who was Defensive Rookie of the Year last year. They also drafted a running back, Jarquez Hunter out of Auburn, another running back to that room that has Kyron Williams and Blake Corum. Kyron Williams in particular, who's been really productive throughout this past couple of seasons in the league. And then drafting a defensive tackle in Ty Hamilton out of Ohio State and linebacker Chris Paul Jr. out of Ole Miss. With that, and Ole Miss had a really good defense. We'll get more into them later, because they had a player like Trey Amos who ended up going to the Commanders. I mentioned Walter Nolan with the Cardinals as well too. So Chris Paul Jr. is going to be, I think, a really good value pick in the 5th round. And then in round 7, drafting wide receiver Konata Mumpfield. We'll see if he makes the roster. We obviously know that they already have a stacked wide receiver room, but I like what the Rams did. I'll give them a B. I think they still should be favorites to win the division because we still have to see how this 49ers team shapes up and how healthy they are. But I like their draft, and I think the NFC West, overall, all these teams did really good. If I had to pick a winner out of the draft for the division, I'm going to say the Cardinals just because I really like what they did adding to their defense and getting those value picks, particularly like Will Johnson in the second round too. So a really good draft overall from the division. Last but not least, the final division that we're going to talk about in this video is the NFC East. The Eagles won the division, of course, last year, and Howie Roseman, he somehow continues to do it, guys. He had a really good draft. Of course, they won the Super Bowl, so they had the 32nd overall pick, but they traded with Kansas City to get the 31st pick. And in the first round, they drafted linebacker J.I. Campbell out of Alabama. Really good player, a really good pick. I like that. Adding to the Eagles defense that was very dominant, the best in the league last year. We saw that on full display in the Super Bowl, how they absolutely murdered the Kansas City Chiefs. So he might take a little bit of development, but I think he'll be able to have a role eventually in that defense, along with Zach Bond, Kobe Dean, and their other defensive weapons in that linebacker room. They also drafted safety Andrew Makuba out of Texas. I think that he really slipped and could have won at the top of the second round, to be honest with you. That's a really good pick. And then they just added some more defensive insurance, defensive tackle out of Nebraska, Ty Robinson, cornerback Mac McWilliams out of UCF, another linebacker in Smell Monin Jr. out of Georgia, and then just some more later picks at the offensive line. At edge, I really like their 6th round pick in Kyle McCord, just adding another backup quarterback to that room just in case, because Kyle McCord, he had a really good year at Syracuse. He kind of struggled in 2023 at Ohio State. He transferred to Syracuse last year and had a really good season, so I like that pick as well. I'm going to give the Eagles an A- grade. I don't like the Eagles. I'm a Cowboys fan, guys, but I have to give credit where it is. Howie Roseman is the best GM in football, and there's a lot of good GMs in the NFL for sure, don't get me wrong, but Howie Roseman continues to prove it, whether it's in free agency, whether it's through trade, whether it's in the draft. He finds good value, and they know how to develop in Philadelphia, so shouts out to them having an A- grade in this draft. Now moving on to the Washington Commanders, I'm probably going to give them a B grade. I like what they did, particularly drafting Trey Amos. I kind of mentioned him a little bit earlier. I love that pick. You can make the argument that he should have been drafted at the top of the second round, maybe at the end of the first round. Cornerback out of Ole Miss, who has really good ball skills, and I like what he adds to that Dan Quinn defense, who traded for Marshawn Lattimore in the middle of last season before the trade deadline. And they drafted Josh Carnerly Jr., Oregon offensive tackle, to pair with a player like Laramie Tunsil on the offensive line. They're just continuing to add protection to that Commanders offense to help Jaden Daniels be utilized and even unlocked even more out of the phenomenal rookie year that he had, leading that team to the NFC Championship game. And beyond that, not too many crazy picks. They only had 5 picks in the draft. Jalen Lane, wide receiver out of Virginia Tech, was a solid pick. Then they drafted Kane Madrano out of UCLA, linebacker, and running back Ja'Cory Krosky Merritt out of Arizona. So a solid draft, not too many picks, but they were able to make an impact with the picks that they had to help their team for sure, and I'm going to give them a B grade. And this team, they were the worst team in the division for sure. They had the 3rd overall pick for a reason. The New York Giants, I think they had the best draft in the division. I think the whole NFC East as a whole, they had a pretty good draft. No one really sucked in their draft picks, even though my philosophy for a lot of teams at times is teams suck at drafting. But a lot of teams did really good. I mean, as you see on my grades, I don't have anyone below a C yet. But I have to give the New York Giants an A. Drafting Abdul Carter out of Penn State was a chalk pick, but for sure you had to add that to your roster. And you have a Micah Parsons type of player, not Micah Parsons, because he isn't him yet, or on that level yet, but he certainly has the potential to be an all-pro type of defensive end and make a huge impact to that defense, which is already really good. Dexter Lawrence on the defensive line, Brian Burns, and Kayvon Thibodeau. But trading into the first round with the Texans to pick Jackson Dart at the 25th overall pick, I like that as well too. We'll see what type of quarterback he is in the future. That's a quarterback that Brian Daboll and the New York Giants staff wanted for the future, and he can sit behind Russell Wilson and Jameis Winston just to develop and learn. So only time will tell with that. But they also drafted Darius Alexander, defensive tackle out of Toledo, just adding to that defensive line, and really one of my favorite picks of the draft period. Love this pick for the Giants, drafting a running back in Cam Scatterboo. We saw the type of impact that he had really overall last season, but in that game against Texas in the college football playoff, he really solidified himself being one of the best running backs in the country and one of the best running backs in this class. I think a top 10 running back prospect. Despite his lower frame, he is really powerful of a running back, and I love the way that he plays football. Very physical type of back, and he's gonna really help add and embody the New York culture that the Giants used to embody. We'll see if they're able to get back there, but I really like their draft. Then they were able to draft offensive tackle Marcus Mbaugh from Purdue, Thomas Fidone, tight end out of Nebraska, and then lastly in the 7th round draft cornerback Corey Black out of Oklahoma State. So I like this draft for them. I think the New York Giants, they have an A grade in their draft, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to have a really good season. I do expect them to be improved though. I'm not going to predict them to make the playoff. I think that they really did have a good draft, and at the least, if their offense isn't too productive, I think that their defense is going to be even better. And their defense has been good for the past couple of years too. It's just been the inconsistent quarterback play that has really crippled them. And last but not least, I was going to say my team for last. I'm not going to lie, guys. Hey, I know everyone hates on them, so it is what it is. But I'm going to talk about the Dallas Cowboys. I still am annoyed about them not drafting a wide receiver 2 or getting one, because Yes, you can sign a veteran at this point, I guess. A lot of people have made rumors about them signing Amari Cooper, but I would have loved to pair a young wide receiver with CeeDee Lamb to continue to grow into the future with him. But it is what it is, guys. I'm not going to contemplate the wide receivers I would have loved, like a T-Mac, obviously, until the Panthers shattered that dream, or even a Emeka Egbuka, or even a Luther Burton in the second round. Thanks a lot, Chicago Bears. I can't wait till the Cowboys play against them. Hopefully the Cowboys are better so we can destroy them. But anyways, I had to give the Cowboys a B+ grade because a lot of people have A's on them, which I can see for sure, but I'm just really annoyed by them not drafting wide receiver 2. And maybe this would change depending on what they do in a trade market, if they're able to get like a George Pickens or a Romeo Doubs at this point, because like I said, the Green Bay Packers, their wide receiver room, they have a lot of players in that now, so we'll see them. And he was a little disgruntled last year, but I would love for the Cowboys to get a younger wide receiver too. But I'm going to give them a B+ draft grade because I think Tyler Booker, he's going to be an instant starter at right guard, going to really embody what Brian Schottenheimer, head coach, wants the Cowboys mantra of offense to be: a physical run first football team and also defensively stopping the run. And speaking of defensively, they added to that, drafting in round 2, number 44 overall, Donovan Ezaraku. Love that pick. Certainly a really good pick at edge. Really think that he was a first-round talent and he slipped to the Cowboys' lap, so they had to draft him. And the Cowboys, they really approached the best player available, BPA type of draft, which is the best thing to do. You never want to reach for a need just in case, so I do appreciate that with the Cowboys. And in round 3, they were able to draft Javon Ravel Jr. out of East Carolina. If he didn't get that ACL injury, he would have been a first-round pick for sure. And the Cowboys, they have information on his injury. Their orthopedic doctor did the surgery on Ravel Jr., so I think that he's going to be able to be ready day one in terms of for training camp and then for the first game of the season, and he's going to have a really good impact. And I love their 5th-round pick, drafting running back Jaden Blue out of Texas. Had a few fumbling issues, so they have to coach him right, but he shows some great ability and speed. I believe he ran a 4.3 at his pro day, and I think that he had a hip injury, and I think he had an injury with that, so he has a lot of electric speed, and he's really good as a pass catcher out of the backfield as well too. So I love that pick, a weapon for their offense. Drafting Shamar James, linebacker out of Florida. That seems like an Eberflus type of pick. He used to be the linebackers coach in Dallas back in the mid-2010s, so I like that pick as well too. And just adding to the offensive line, Ajani Cornelius out of Oregon, defensive tackle Jay Toya out of UCLA, 300+ pound defensive tackle, tough player, and I like that pick because they needed some defensive tackles. And they also drafted a defensive tackle in round 7, Tommy King Basote out of Maryland. So just adding to that room, getting some one-techs to be able to be paired with a player like Osa Odigizua, who was extended this offseason, and really add competition to Amazi Smith, who hasn't necessarily met the Cowboys' expectations yet, but not to say that he won't, because now you have some depth, and maybe you'll get the best out of players when you have that type of competition, when they know that, hey, their job can be on the line. So that's a good thing there. And they also added another running back in the 7th round, Phil Moffitt out of Clemson. Just another player to add to that room with now Jaden Blue, Javonte Williams, and Miles Sanders. So I think the Cowboys had a B+ draft. It was really solid, but I still like to see them make that wide receiver 2 move, potentially in a trade or something like that. So we'll see. But I do like what the Cowboys did, and as a Cowboys fan, I am encouraged. But we'll see what happens. So like I said, guys, I really didn't have any low grades for these teams, and it's hard to judge, especially at this point. It's very early in the offseason. We just got off the draft, just happened last week, so we'll see who utilized their draft picks the best this year and who will eventually win offensive and defensive rookie of the year, and who will be the biggest steal from this year's draft. If I had to say the biggest winners from this draft, for sure the Patriots. Love what they did, love what the Giants did, love what the Cardinals did, Cowboys did, Bears for sure as well. The Jaguars in terms of their aggressive approach, and the Texans making sure that they don't have anything lacking at the wide receiver position. Green Bay adding a player like Matthew Golden, and the Ravens adding to their defense, among others. I mean, I really like what a lot of these teams did to certain extents. If I had to say any losers who I wasn't as impressed, but still got some solid grades, like I said, I was pretty fair and pretty lenient in this draft grading process of the video, but I didn't necessarily like fully the Steelers' approach. Yes, they drafted a quarterback, but it wasn't until the 6th round, so don't feel too great about that, but hey, we'll see what they do. The Dolphins, I feel like they could have tried to get a cornerback in earlier rounds, but I still like them getting a player like Ollie Gordon at the running back position to pair with Devon Achane, so I like that. But I think that it's going to be intriguing to see who are the best players from this draft. It was a really deep draft. It was really unpredictable. It's one of the most unpredictable drafts that I've witnessed in the past few years, really paying attention to the process and the scouting and all things of that nature, and watching film and tape on players. But it's a beautiful thing, and I love this time of the year. We're closer and closer to May 14th, which is the official day of the schedule release that will air on the NFL Network. We'll have an idea of when these teams are playing against each other, things of that nature too. So we're getting closer and closer to things like OTAs, training camp. It's going to be a really good season, guys. Stay tuned for more content that I will talk about in the off season, but also into the NFL season. Y'all know how I operate during the NFL year. I post a lot of different videos, but particularly weekly, I post the recaps for every single week after the games and things of that nature. I haven't come up with a title yet that I will consistently use, because like last year in 2024, I used the biggest takeaways from week so-and-so, and In 2023, I used what we learned from week so-and-so, but I had to find out a new title that I'm going to use, so stay tuned for that, guys. But yeah, I appreciate the love always, the support always, guys. Y'all be blessed. Like I said, follow me on Instagram and Twitter at SwaggyRuss if y'all want to talk about sports or just anything in life in general. Subscribe to the channel and like these videos, guys. I have a lot more content on the way, especially NBA-wise, too. We have the playoffs going on right now as well, which have been really good and really intriguing, and I'll have more to talk about that in the future videos, guys. But yeah, y'all be blessed. Know that you are loved. God has so many great things for you. Jesus loves you, guys. Y'all be blessed, and y'all have a good one.